The ship touched down on the barren surface of the alien planet with a soft hum. The air was thick with tension, but Captain Emily Rhodes remained calm. She had faced many challenges in her time as a human envoy, but this was different. This was the Zanksari. The Zanksari were a tall, imposing race known for their advanced technology and fierce warrior culture. They had conquered numerous planets in their time, and their reputation for strength and aggression was well known across the galaxy. Emily had been sent to this planet as part of a peace mission. The hope was that diplomacy could open a path for a lasting agreement between the Zanksari and the remaining factions who were still resisting their dominance. Emily stood tall as she descended the ramp of her ship. Her uniform was simple, designed for utility, with a soft fabric that allowed freedom of movement. She glanced up at the vast skyline of the Zanksari capital. Massive stone structures loomed overhead, their sharp angles reflecting the harsh light of the planet's twin suns. There was no sign of welcome here, just the watchful eyes of guards stationed at every corner. As she approached the waiting officials, Emily noticed the stoic faces of the Zanksari. They stood in perfect formation, tall and straight, with their arms at their sides, almost as if they were prepared for a fight. Emily knew their culture emphasized strength and dominance. She couldn't help but feel a wave of nervousness as she made her way to the front of the crowd. But she was human. Fear wouldn't stop her. The meeting room was large and cold, with towering walls that gave the space an intimidating feel. At the far end of the room sat High Commander Rylos, the leader of the Zanksari. He was a giant among his people, his presence almost overwhelming. His features were sharp, his eyes cold and calculating, and his posture demanded respect. He looked down at Emily as she entered, sizing her up like a predator stalking its prey. Emily stood firm, meeting his gaze with a calm but confident stare. She knew that the first impression was crucial, and she had to get this right. The fate of the peace talks would depend on how they interacted in these first few moments. She took a step forward, her body open and unthreatening. She held her hands at her sides, trying to convey peace. Her movements were slow and deliberate, human gestures of openness, warmth, and friendliness. But to Rylos, it was a challenge. The Zanksari had evolved in a world where every motion was scrutinized, where even the smallest movement could signal aggression or threat. Their species communicated with strict postures, and their bodies were built for defense. To them, a gesture like Emily's, arms relaxed by her sides, was a sign of vulnerability. But the Zanksari did not show vulnerability. They only knew strength. Rylos frowned, his eyes narrowing as he observed Emily's posture. "Human," Rylos' voice boomed, breaking the silence. "Do you not understand the danger you present?" Emily blinked, surprised. "I'm not presenting any danger," she said, her voice steady but filled with confusion. She had thought she was making her peace offering clear. Rylos leaned forward, his dark eyes glowing with a mix of suspicion and disdain. "Your body language," he said. "It is not the way we communicate. You stand in a position of weakness. A posture like yours is an invitation to attack." Emily's heart skipped a beat. She had read about the Zanksari's rigid code of conduct, but this was different. She hadn't expected her body to be a weapon in itself, nor had she thought about how her human form would be perceived as a threat. She took a step back, trying to adjust her stance to something more neutral, but the damage was done. The atmosphere in the room had shifted. The Zanksari guards at the back of the room tensed, their eyes trained on her every move. "No, I am not weak," she said, raising her chin slightly in an attempt to project strength. "I am here to speak for peace. Humans don't use their bodies to fight or to intimidate." Rylos stood up, towering over her. "Your words are meaningless if your actions betray you," he said coldly. "A peaceful stance in our culture is one that does not expose the chest, one that does not leave you open for attack. Your position is one of ignorance. You come to us with your false sense of peace, but your form speaks otherwise." Emily opened her mouth to respond, but was interrupted by the sudden sound of the Zanksari guards stepping forward. They had raised their weapons, pointing them at her. The metallic clang of their weapons echoed through the room, and Emily froze. They were ready to strike at any moment. She had to think quickly. "I didn't mean to offend you," Emily said, her voice softening. "I only want to understand your culture and to find a way for our peoples to live in harmony." For a moment, the room fell silent. Rylos stood motionless, his gaze still locked on her. Emily's heart pounded in her chest, but she kept her composure. She knew the Zangsari were a proud race, and she knew that she had made a grave error. Her gesture, meant to convey peace, had been seen as weakness. But in that moment, Emily knew she had to fix this. It was her only chance to make the peace talks work. Slowly, she adjusted her stance again. This time, she squared her shoulders, holding her arms just slightly away from her body, not in an aggressive gesture, but in a way that didn't seem exposed. She kept her hands open, but now her stance was firmer, more grounded. "I am not here to show weakness," she said again. "I'm here to speak for peace, and I will stand firm for it. Please hear me." Rylos studied her for a long moment. Finally, he gave a short, dismissive gesture with his hand, signaling his guards to lower their weapons. The tension in the room didn't ease completely, but it was a sign, a small victory. "Very well, human," Rylos said, his voice still cold but tinged with curiosity. "You will speak. But know this, your gestures, your body must be understood here. We do not tolerate weakness." Emily nodded, relieved but also unsettled. She had gained a small amount of trust, but the real challenge was ahead. She knew that understanding the Zangsari's deep-rooted culture would be crucial in convincing them that peace was possible. As the meeting continued, Emily couldn't help but think about how different the Zangsari were. Their bodies, built for strength and aggression, were so different from her own. They viewed the world through a lens of constant battle, constantly ready for a fight. It wasn't just their weapons that made them dangerous, it was the way they carried themselves. Every movement, every posture had meaning, but Emily was determined. She would find a way to communicate with them, not just with her words, but with her actions. She knew that this misunderstanding about her body, about how humans were built, could be the key to breaking down the walls between their worlds. As the sun set outside the meeting room, casting long shadows across the stone floors, Emily steeled herself for what was to come. The first step had been taken, but there were many more to go. The next day, Emily woke up early. She had spent a restless night, tossing and turning in her quarters, her mind racing. The events of yesterday had left her shaken, but she refused to let that stop her. She knew that this peace mission was crucial, not just for her people, but for the future of the galaxy. The Zangsari had the power to change everything, and if she couldn't win their trust, peace would remain out of reach. After breakfast, Emily made her way to the conference room where she was scheduled to meet with High Commander Rylos again. The cold walls of the building loomed over her, casting shadows as she walked. It was hard to believe that this intimidating place could one day be the setting for something as fragile as peace. But that was her goal, to bring peace to a place that had known nothing but conflict. When she entered the room, Rylos was already waiting. He stood tall, his posture perfect, his eyes cold and unreadable. Emily took a deep breath, reminding herself that she was here to represent humanity. She couldn't afford to let her nerves show. "Good morning, Commander Rylos," Emily said, trying to sound confident. Her voice echoed slightly in the large room. Rylos gave her a curt nod but didn't respond immediately. Instead, he gestured toward a chair across from him. Emily sat down, keeping her hands visible on the table in front of her, trying to show that she meant no harm. She had learned from yesterday that every gesture counted. "You return," Rylos said finally, his voice low and measured. "Tell me, human, how do you intend to show us that your species is worth trusting?" Emily's heart sank, but she didn't let her frustration show. She had expected this question, and she had a plan. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said yesterday," she began. "About my body language, about how I stand. I understand now that you see things differently from us." Rylos raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. He leaned back slightly in his chair, his arms crossed in front of him. "Continue," he said. Emily nodded. "Humans don't think of body posture the way your people do. For us, our gestures, our stance, are meant to express openness, not to show weakness. But I realize that to you, they seem like an invitation for attack. I wasn't aware of how deeply these differences run." Rylos didn't respond right away. He simply stared at her as if waiting for her to continue. Emily took a deep breath and sat up straighter in her chair, trying to mirror the kind of confidence she had seen in him. "I want to show you," she said carefully, "that my people don't communicate through force. We don't need to. We rely on words, trust, and the ability to understand one another. So if you will allow me, I'd like to try again, show you the way we communicate." For a long moment, Rylos said nothing. Emily couldn't read his face, but his silence was telling. Was he mocking her? Or was he truly considering what she said? Finally, he spoke. "You think that simply standing the way you do will make me trust you?" Emily nodded. It's not just about the posture, it's about understanding the intentions behind it. If you trust that I mean no harm, then maybe we can begin to understand each other better. Rilo's eyes narrowed slightly. You speak of trust, but you have not earned mine. Perhaps this gesture of yours will help, but I doubt it. Emily took a moment, her heart pounding. This was it. There was no turning back now. She stood up slowly, making sure her movements were deliberate and calm. She had to get this right. She spread her arms slightly, not in a defensive manner, but as if to say, I am open to you. She made sure not to tense her shoulders or raise her chin too high, nothing that might make her seem threatening. Instead, she lowered her body slightly, showing that she was not going to force anything. She kept her hands open, facing the floor in a peaceful gesture, not one of submission but of equality. For a moment, she felt incredibly vulnerable. It wasn't easy to expose oneself this way, physically, emotionally, but she had to believe it would work. She had to believe that the Sari would understand. Rilo said nothing for what felt like an eternity. Emily stood there, her arms still slightly extended, waiting for any sign that he understood. Was he seeing it? Was he realizing that humans didn't use gestures to show weakness? Then, slowly, Rilo stood. His towering figure cast a long shadow across the room. Emily could see that he was contemplating her every movement, studying her carefully. He seemed to take in every detail of her posture, every subtle movement in her body. Finally, he spoke. This gesture, he began, his voice heavy with skepticism, is not what I expected. But it is curious. Emily relaxed, lowering her arms. It's how humans are built, Commander. We've never needed to use weapons like your people. Our strength lies in our ability to communicate, to connect. Rilos looked at her closely, his eyes still cold but with something new in them, something like curiosity. Your people do not fight, yet you come here to my world to speak of peace. You do not carry weapons, and yet you expect to change our ways. Emily nodded, understanding the weight of his words. Yes, we believe that strength is not just in physical power. Strength is in the mind, in the heart. If we can learn to trust each other, we can overcome any challenge without violence. Rilos was silent for a long time, and Emily wasn't sure if he was considering her words or dismissing them. The quiet in the room seemed to stretch endlessly, each second feeling like a test. Then, at last, he spoke again. Perhaps you are right. Perhaps we have overlooked the power of your words, but trust, human, is something that must be earned. If you wish to prove your peace, you must do more than show us your openness. You must show us that you can keep your word. Emily's heart lifted slightly. She had expected more resistance, but this was progress. She had made a breakthrough, no matter how small. She had shown Rilos that her people weren't so different after all, that they weren't weak for their peaceful stance. I will, she said, her voice steady and clear. I will prove it to you. We'll work together step by step, and you'll see that humans can be trusted. Rilos regarded her with an unreadable expression. We will see, human, we will see. And with that, the meeting was over. Emily felt a sense of accomplishment, though it was tempered by the realization that this was only the beginning. The journey ahead would not be easy. There would be more misunderstandings, more moments of tension, but she had taken the first step. As she left the room, she couldn't help but wonder, was this truly the path to peace? Or was it just the first test of many? Only time would tell. The days that followed were not easy for Emily. The initial breakthrough with Commander Rilos had brought a small glimmer of hope, but the path to full trust was still a long one. She couldn't afford to rest on the success of a single conversation. The Sari were not a race that easily opened up to outsiders. They had spent centuries building their society around strength and power, and peace was a foreign concept to them. But Emily refused to give up. She had a mission, and she had to see it through. Every morning, she arrived at the conference room early, preparing herself mentally for the day ahead. She had learned that every interaction with the Sari was a test. Even small gestures, like how she moved her hands or where she placed them, were scrutinized. They were watching her closely, waiting for her to slip up. But Emily kept her posture open, her gestures calm and deliberate, refusing to let her nerves show. Rilo seemed less hostile now, but his gaze was still guarded. He had been intrigued by her peace offerings, but he was not yet ready to fully trust her. Each time they spoke, she noticed that he would observe her carefully, his eyes darting to her hands or her stance, as if searching for something that would confirm his suspicions about humanity. She couldn't blame him. After all, his people had known nothing but war for generations. Still, Emily pressed on. She continued to speak of peace, of cooperation, of the things that humans valued most: understanding, communication, and trust. Every conversation was an attempt to break through the walls that had been built around the Zanksari. But it wasn't easy. Every time she mentioned peace, Rylos would respond with the same question. If peace is so valuable to you, then why do you not defend it with strength? Why do you not fight for it? The question weighed heavily on Emily, but she answered the same way every time. Strength isn't just about fighting. Strength is about knowing when to fight and when to talk. Strength is in the ability to build, not destroy. At first, Rylos had looked at her with disbelief, but now there was a small flicker of something else in his eyes. Maybe it was curiosity, or perhaps it was doubt. Emily wasn't sure, but she could see the tiniest crack in his armor. It gave her hope. It wasn't until the fifth day that things truly began to change. Emily had prepared a new proposal for the Zanksari. It was an idea she had been working on for days, a plan that would show the Zanksari how humans didn't just want peace, they wanted collaboration. She would not simply ask for an agreement. She would offer them something more, something they couldn't ignore. She walked into the conference room, a folder of documents under her arm, feeling more confident than she had in days. When Rylos saw her, he gave her a brief nod, but there was no warmth in it. His expression was unreadable. Emily sat down and opened the folder, laying out the contents carefully. "I've been thinking about how we can move forward," she said, her voice steady. "I know that trust cannot be built overnight, but I believe that cooperation is possible. We both want the same thing, security for our people. But we also want peace, and for peace to work, we must collaborate." Rylos remained silent, but his eyes were focused on the documents she had placed on the table. Emily's plan was simple. She proposed a series of exchanges, human technology shared in exchange for Zanksari resources. A trade agreement that could benefit both sides without anyone feeling threatened. She knew that the Zanksari valued their resources more than anything, and the idea of gaining access to human technology was something they would not easily dismiss. "There is one catch," Emily added, her voice growing more serious. "We would need to send teams to each other's worlds. Humans would visit Zanksari territory and Zanksari would visit Earth. It's the only way to truly understand each other. We cannot rely on assumptions. We must see the world through each other's eyes." Rylos didn't react immediately. He stared at the documents, his mind clearly working. Emily waited. She knew this was the moment that could change everything. Finally, Rylos spoke. "You would send your people to our worlds?" His voice was low, but there was a sharpness to it. "And trust that we will not harm them?" Emily nodded. "Yes, just as we trust you to send your people to Earth. This is about more than just an agreement. This is about demonstrating that we believe in each other, and that is the only way peace will be possible." For the first time, Rylos didn't seem as certain. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms over his chest. Emily could see the wheels turning in his mind. She could feel the hesitation radiating off of him. "We are a proud people," he said slowly. "We have fought for everything we have. What makes you think we will just give it all up for some human ideal?" Emily's heart raced, but she didn't let it show. "Because I believe that the greatest strength is in building something together, in forging a future not by force but by understanding." There was silence in the room, thick and heavy. Rylos was deep in thought, his eyes locked on the papers before him. Emily held her breath, waiting for his answer. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Rylos spoke again, his voice quiet but firm. "Perhaps we will give this proposal a chance, but know this, human, trust is earned, not given, and it is a fragile thing. You may find that your people are not so welcome in our lands." Emily didn't flinch. She had expected this answer, but there was something different in his tone this time. There was no contempt, no immediate rejection. He was willing to consider her offer. And that, Emily realized, was a victory. "I understand," she said simply. "We will take it one step at a time. I believe that the more we work together, the stronger our bond will become." Rylos didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stood up and walked to the large window that overlooked the city below. Emily followed his gaze, her mind racing. She could see the war-torn landscape, the signs of a people who had fought for every inch of ground they had. The Zanksari had known nothing but war for centuries. The idea of peace, of cooperation, it was almost foreign to them. After a long pause, Rylos finally turned back to face her. "We will allow this exchange." But if your people fail to live up to their promises, there will be no second chances. Emily nodded, her heart swelling with a mix of relief and determination. We won't fail. Rylos gave her a long look, as if searching for any sign that she was lying. But in the end, he simply nodded once, his expression unreadable. We will see. The meeting ended shortly after that, and Emily left the room with a sense of cautious optimism. The path ahead was still uncertain. There were many hurdles to overcome, many challenges to face. But she had made progress. She had earned a small measure of trust from the Zangsari, and that was a start. As she walked back to her quarters, Emily couldn't help but feel that, for the first time since she arrived, peace was within reach. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be quick, but maybe, just maybe, humanity and the Zangsari could find a way to coexist. The road ahead would be long, but it was a road she was willing to walk.